Imagine giving a child a simple art assignment. Draw a picture of a person who has a third eye and place that eye anywhere on the body. If you ask a 9-year-old to do this, their response is highly predictable. They will almost always draw the extra eye right on the forehead, typically between the other two. To them, it's literal. An eye belongs on a face because that is where eyes go. But ask an 11-year-old and the logic shifts. They might draw the eye in the palm of their hand, explaining that they want to be able to see around corners or look inside a cookie jar. Their reasoning has detached from strict physical reality and entered the realm of the abstract. This specific leap in cognitive capability, from literal observation to hypothetical reasoning, fascinated a Swiss psychologist named John Piaget. He saw these distinct shifts not as random quirks of childhood, but as evidence of a universal, invariant sequence of intellectual growth. At the core of his work was a singular paradigm. The child is a constructivist. They do not sit passively absorbing facts from adults. Instead, they act like little scientists, actively manipulating objects and testing ideas to build their own internal model of reality. Piaget's stage theory laid the groundwork for modern developmental psychology. Yet when we test his structural timeline against modern experimental edge cases, the data reveals a different story. Human cognition does not climb a rigid, universal staircase of logic. Rather, it builds a highly contextual, domain-specific toolkit. Piaget's early background was in zoology, and it deeply informed his definition of intelligence. He viewed human intellect simply as a basic life function that helps an organism adapt to its environment. The ultimate goal of this adaptation is to achieve a balanced, harmonious state between one's thought processes and the outside world, a state he called cognitive equilibrium. To reach this equilibrium, the brain relies on two biological mechanisms, assimilation and accommodation. Imagine a toddler who has only ever seen flying birds. They form a mental structure, a schema, that categorizes all flying objects as birdies. When that child points to an airplane in the sky and calls it a birdie, they are using assimilation. They are taking a new experience and trying to map it directly into their existing mental framework. Soon, however, the child notices the airplane has no feathers and doesn't flap its wings. The current schema fails. This mismatch between internal logic and external reality causes a state of cognitive conflict, or disequilibrium. To fix this conflict, the brain uses accommodation. It modifies its existing structures to account for the puzzling new data, creating an entirely new schema specifically for airplanes. Finally, the brain organizes these schemas into a higher order, complex hierarchical understanding of flying objects. This relentless biological drive to resolve cognitive conflict is the engine. Piaget believed this continuous cycle of assimilation and accommodation physically pushed children through 4 distinct sequential stages of mental capability. The first of Piaget's stages is the sensory-motor period, spanning from birth to roughly 2 years of age. During this time, he claimed infants understand the world purely through overt physical actions, grasping, tasting, looking, and lack any internal symbolic thought. The major milestone of this stage is supposed to be the acquisition of object permanence, the realization that objects continue to exist even when they are hidden from the senses. Piaget demonstrated infants' failure to grasp this with the classic A not B error. If an 8-month-old watches you repeatedly hide a toy under a specific blanket, and then watches you hide a toy in a new location, they will habitually search for it where they previously found it. Their behavior suggests the object only exists in relation to their previous physical action. But modern researchers, known as neo-nativists, noticed a flaw in this conclusion. Does the infant actually lack object permanence? Or are Piaget's physical search tasks simply too demanding for an 8-month-old's uncoordinated motor skills? To answer this, researcher Karen Wynn designed an arithmetic experiment to test infant symbolic ability without requiring physical action. One object is placed on an empty miniature stage. 5-month-old infants watch as a screen is raised to hide that first object. Then a hand reaches in and adds a second object behind the screen, 1 + 1. The screen is then dropped to reveal the impossible outcome, showing only a single object remaining on the stage, magically defying the rules of addition. The data was incredibly clear. Infants stare significantly longer at this impossible outcome compared to a mathematically correct one. In cognitive research, this prolonged gaze is a standard metric for surprise. To be surprised by bad math, the infant must have held an active, symbolic mental representation of the hidden objects behind that screen. Piaget equated an infant's inability to coordinate a physical search with an inability to think. By relying on motor-heavy tasks, he missed the innate symbolic knowledge hardwired into the brain. From ages 2 to 7, children enter the pre-operational stage. Piaget defined this era mostly by its logical limitations. The most striking of these is egocentrism, a profound difficulty in recognizing any point of view other than one's own. This is illustrated by Piaget's three-mountain problem. A child sits on one side of a table featuring an asymmetrical mountain model, and a doll is placed on the opposite side. When the experimenter asks the child what the doll sees from its vantage point, the child fails to adopt the spatial perspective of the doll. Instead, they simply describe the exact view from their own chair. Another major limitation is the failure of conservation. Pre-operational children lack decentration, the ability to concentrate on more than one aspect of a problem simultaneously. We can see this in the first row of this chart, showing the classic liquid volume test. When identical amounts of liquid are poured into a short, wide beaker and a taller, thinner glass, the child declares the tall glass has more. Their logic is entirely hijacked by the singular visual cue of the liquid's height. These observations seem bulletproof until we view them through the modern framework of theory of mind. We have to ask, are young children truly egocentric in all facets of reasoning? Or do they just struggle with Piaget's specific, highly spatial blizzles? To test psychological perspective taking, researchers use a false belief task. Instead of asking a child to imagine a physical viewpoint, they ask them to track another person's mental state. The setup is simple. A boy named Jorge places some chocolate in a blue cupboard and leaves the room. While he is gone, his mother moves the chocolate to the green cupboard. The researcher then asks the child, when Jorge returns, where will he look? A standard 3-year-old will answer, the green cupboard. They egocentrically assume Jorge possesses the same information they do, failing to separate their own knowledge from his false belief. But here is the critical nuance. If the researcher alters the experiment and invites the 3-year-old to actively help hide the object to play a trick on an adult, the child suddenly passes the test flawlessly. They easily predict the adult will look in the wrong place. Pre-operational children are highly capable of complex perspective-taking. Piaget's rigid, overly verbal tasks simply overloaded their working memory, masking an underlying cognitive competence that was already there. At around age 11, children enter Piaget's final stage, formal operations. This era is characterized by abstract hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Piaget viewed this stage as a holistic mental upgrade. He assumed that once a child acquired this formal logic, it would apply equally across every subject and scenario they encountered. But even Piaget noticed developmental inconsistencies, coining the term horizontal décalage. This describes a situation where a child successfully solves one logical problem, but completely fails a different task requiring the exact same cognitive operations. If we apply this observation to adults, the holistic model breaks down completely. If formal operations are a permanent, universal stage of biology, why do adults constantly fail basic logical reasoning tests when operating outside their comfort zones? A cross-disciplinary study on college students illustrates this perfectly. This chart plots the percentage of students displaying formal thought across 3 different problem domains: physics, political science, and literature. When tested on the physics pendulum problem, the physics majors easily demonstrate formal logic. The political science majors, however, largely fail to reason through the same physics task. Though when the test flips to a problem requiring political logic, the results invert entirely. The political science majors excel, and the physics majors fail. True abstract logical performance is not a broad, steady-state plateau of human development. It is an optimized cognitive state, heavily dependent on familiarity, continuous training, and specific content domains. Piaget mapped a theoretical staircase of synchronized cognitive upgrades, but the weight of modern evidence shows that human development is messier, inconsistent, and highly domain-specific. From 5-month-olds passing visual arithmetic tests to 3-year-olds successfully executing deceptive false belief tasks, we see a consistent theme. Methodology defines competence. When the test changes, the mind's hidden capabilities are revealed. Given these systemic flaws in his structural timelines, should developmental science discard Piaget's grand theory entirely? The answer is no. While his specific boundaries have been dismantled, Piaget's fundamental paradigm remains the bedrock of cognitive science. Piaget destroyed the centuries-old assumption that children are empty vessels waiting to be filled with adult knowledge. He proved that from the very moment of birth, the human mind is an active hypothesis-testing engine, relentlessly constructing its own reality.